Friends, thanks for tuning in and having a listen to Holding the Ladder, helping your mates, helping your friends in crisis. I've been asked by the college to come and speak to you about mental health. Mental health first aid is a course that I've been running for many years. I want to acknowledge before we start the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting, the various lands on which we're meeting at the moment. It's an unusual time, isn't it? And I also want to acknowledge leaders past, present and emerging elders in that community. And if you're one of those, a particular welcome to you. So at this point in time, we're in a really unusual place, a really unusual part of our lives for everyone. Very few people have been through anything quite like this. We're kind of inventing the wheel as we go. So today, I'll finish up with just clues about good mental health experts are saying about this current situation and how we address it. I also want to acknowledge that there's lived experience. People are listening in at the moment who have lived experience of mental illness. It may be with themselves. It may be with their families. It may be with friends of theirs or people that they know. Or even it might be just you're aware of the mental health struggles of celebrities and various people that we come across. I really want to encourage you to look after yourself during this presentation. I will be talking about suicide quite directly. And so it's really important that you look after yourself, particularly if you have had that lived experience. And after the talk today, plan to do something just to look after yourself, whether it's just a walk or doing something that you enjoy doing that looks after you. Maybe having a cup of coffee or chatting with a friend or whatever that might be that you need to do. I will say to you also, that the reason we have Holding the Ladder, what is that about? Holding the Ladder is actually a term I came up with last year when I was thinking of a situation that I faced when I was a young teacher many years back. It was actually in my first year of teaching, and I had a pastoral role with students, and I got a call from a parent who said to me, my daughter's not coming on holidays with us. She's 15 and she's refusing to come on holidays with us. And she asked me, what should I do? And I said, well, find someone who you can sort of leave her with perhaps. You know, is that a good idea? Maybe other friends or family or whatever that you could leave her with while you go away. And she said, yeah, that's what the police said. And I said, really, the police are already involved? I thought, gee, this is an interesting contact list she's got here with the police first and then me. But I said to her, where is she now? And she said she's holding onto the pillar outside our house and her dad's trying to pull her off. And this came out of my mouth. It was the most arrogant thing. At this stage, I was a parent of a 6-month-old, so I had no real experience of what it was to be a parent of a teenager. And she said, I said to her, someone's got to be the adult. It was the right thing to say, as it turns out, because she just sighed and went, yeah. Everyone had escalated to the level of that 15-year-old girl. Everyone in the house had elevated, and that can happen. And at the moment, particularly when we're all kind of stuck at home, doing the right thing, hopefully keeping inside. I use the term physical distancing, not social distancing. I think social connection is what we're after now. Physical distancing is what we're doing. And so for me, the idea of what we should do if someone is in a crisis, if someone is having a mental health problem, is holding the ladder. It's just not moving the slide at the moment. I just get that along one. Thank you. So holding the ladder, the idea of that is when someone's in a crisis, someone's up the top of a ladder and they're flailing away, really not quite in control of where they are, the worst thing you could do is actually climb the ladder with them and be in the same space. So what I'm suggesting is what you would do is just hold the ladder still. Keep it still so that they can right themselves. And obviously, if they do fall, you're actually in a good position to then get them some first aid, to get them some help. The reason why I'm speaking about that is I think that is what is true of mental health too. So if you're wondering, what should I do with my friends or family members who are in crisis, who are flailing at the top of that ladder from a point of view of their mental health, if they're really struggling, the best thing you can do is keep calm and be there for them. One of the things that we underrate is listening, and I really want to encourage you to be a listener at this stage. If you're concerned about anyone, people often say to me, what do you say? My history has been with Lifeline. I used to be a manager of their community education line, and I used to train the volunteers as well. And in that, one of the things that was really clear was just listening is really valuable. Just being someone who's there to listen to them. I'll give you an example of that. A favourite example of mine was in reading a book by a lady called Lee Sales, who many of you will know from the 7:30 report if you've seen that on the ABC. Lee Sales is the host of that. And she wrote this book and talked about one of the guys from Port Arthur. You remember that terrible massacre that happened. Walter Mikac lost his daughter, his two daughters and his wife, and lost his whole family in that one space. And he hadn't heard from a friend. Days later, after he'd lost his whole family, one of his best mates, Doug, he hadn't heard from. And he said, I wonder what's happened to Doug. And then one day he's walking down the street and there's Doug coming the other way. Doug sees him, turns around and starts walking away. And Walter's saying to himself, I really need to, this is it, this is the friendship right here. I need to do something here, or this is the end of the friendship. So he goes after him, and in the end, they're both running. And he finally catches Doug. Doug turns around, and he's just a stream of tears. Doug is just crying and sobbing and doesn't know what to do. And Walter says to him, Doug, you don't have to say anything. You don't have to say anything. I think that's a really great message that Walter's given his mate, that actually we're afraid of people who might be going through a crisis, but it's important to remember that we don't actually have to say anything. There's no set right thing to say or do. Just simply being able to listen and be able to say, I care for you, I'm concerned for you. They're really the simple messages people need, and that listening is all they need, even if there's silence. And I often say this to young people, that if there is silence, that's okay. No one ever died of awkward. And mental health conversations can often be quite awkward. So it's really important that you're aware that it's okay to be that. So holding the ladder is really the idea is, and we'll go to the next slide now, is really about keeping calm. So this is a classic that you've probably seen online, never in the history of calm down. Has anyone calmed down by being told to calm down? It's really a good message that we don't actually tell people to be calm. We don't tell them to calm down. We actually are calm. That's the way to do that. And the calmer we are, the more likely they are to calm down. When I was on the phones at Lifeline, one of the things that was really clear was just saying to people who were in great distress, who were overwhelmed, who couldn't even say anything after they'd rung 13, 11, 14, I'd just say, it's okay. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. When you're ready to talk, we'll talk. Otherwise, I'm just here. And here to be what you need me to be at this stage. So that awkwardness is okay if you're dealing with someone who's not calm, who's quite distressed. The first thing that a lot of people think is that nothing can help, that actually nothing I can do will help. That's actually not true. That there's nothing about a mental illness that is any different really to a physical illness. That in fact 50% at least of people who are diagnosed with a mental illness actually recover, have one experience of that and they recover. That's true for me. And just a brief statement about that. My experience throughout life growing up, my mother had very serious mental health struggles. She had paranoia. She thought that everyone was talking about her. And so constantly she would say to me, my uncle's talking to me or telling me lies about her. She was very distressed about this. It was very real for her. And I couldn't get it. I'd look at her and she was depressed and anxious, and I didn't get it. I didn't understand it at all. I looked at her and I just thought, get over it. Life's great. Life's got so much to offer. Just get over it. And I'm sure that was my message to her in the way I treated her, if not in the words I said. But it was only about 15 years ago when I finally experienced that for myself, when I had a response to a running injury that I got, that I had to stop running, and I'd been preparing for marathons, and I had to stop. And all of a sudden that lack of running in my life just caused a real vacuum and a real problem. And I fell into this very dark depression for about 6 months, which for anyone who's watching on, you'll know that if you've had depression for 2 weeks, it seems like an eternity, like March just was for us, that very long March we had being in isolation. 6 months of that taught me that depression is real. There's actually nothing I could do to rip myself out of that. I had to actually just live through it, do good things, exercise, do all the things I needed to do, but there was nothing that could immediately pull me out of that situation. I had to be in that dark space for that period of time. And over time, slowly, I came out of that. For many people, I'm the lucky one. They would say you're lucky. But what it taught me is that there's nothing, that mental illness is real, that it's actually a real experience, as real as any physical illness. And so if someone is experiencing that, just acknowledging that is really, really important, that it's real, what you're experiencing is real, and you can recover. That over time, if we do the right things, if we exercise and diet and sleep well, do all those things, which can be very hard to do when you're struggling in your mental health. If we do those things over time, we can get there. Just going to change the slide again. This is mental health problems destroy your life. That's another one. People think that somehow, that if you have a mental health problem, you will, your life is kind of over. That's not the reality. And I put this picture of an old student of mine, Shannon. In fact, he was in the first class I ever taught. Shannon, he is a wheelchair athlete. He runs his own company called Push the Limits in Sydney, and he is an advocate for people who have a disability. And as you can see from this picture, Shannon's not missing out on anything in life. He is going to do whatever he can possibly do from his wheelchair, and so here he is paddleboarding. That's Shannon in a nutshell. He is a real goer. He has a disability, and yet it doesn't stop him from engaging and enjoying his life probably as much as anyone I know. And yet he's really upfront about his disability. He's also very upfront about his own mental health that he struggles with from time to time. He's had 84 operations in his life for various problems. So he's a classic example. The same is true of mental health. Time after time, and if you go to an organisation like SANE Australia on their health forums, mental health forums, they have story after story of people who have been unwell and who have recovered, and some people who are unwell from time to time, and it returns or it's with them constantly, but they've found ways of actually living with it comfortably and able to live a full life despite that. I'll just change the slide again. Our final myth is going to be that mentally ill people are actually dangerous. I've gone way ahead there. I'll talk to that anyway, if you can just slide it on one when you're available. One of the things, mental health is dangerous. Mentally ill people are dangerous. The Joker was a movie that's come up recently, and was a brilliant movie in many, many ways. Very dark, but what it did say, it really depicted mental health very well. Except that, of course, the way out of that, or the way to get power in it, is to choose violence. That's actually not the reality for mental illness. That for most people who are mentally unwell, the person who's most at risk is themselves, obviously, the most at risk of violence from themselves. Obviously, suicide is a real concern there. They also are more likely to be the victims of violence. So it's actually a myth. Important that we acknowledge that. I'm just putting up some slides now of various famous people who struggled with their mental illness. That first one, Winston Churchill, great leader from the Second World War period. Jim Carrey's another one who we know has struggled with depression, yet he's able to say now that when the rain comes, it rains. So it's dark for a time, like it is at the moment, I guess, for some people. The idea that they can't do what they normally want to do, that can be a bit of a dark space for us. But the difference is between mental illness and just going through a dark space is that it does lift, that it will go, and that actually there are things we can do to make it lift. Being really depressed and severely depressed means that doesn't necessarily lift. The next slide, there we go. J.K. Rowling. In fact, Harry Potter was born out of that experience of thinking life couldn't get any lower for J.K. Rowling, as you're reading in that quote there. Harry Potter was born of that experience, that darkness, that as she saw rock bottom hitting, she wanted to tell an uplifting story. The Rock. Seems like a real tough guy that nothing would get in the way of. He's had his experience of mental illness and he's encouraging men in particular, men and boys in our culture, probably aren't as good as others at asking for help and remembering that we're not alone, that lots of people experience difficulty with their mental health and you can get help and you can recover. It's a good message. Ian Thorpe, as many of you will know, was a world champion swimmer, one of our greats, and he struggled with his mental health. Ian himself is gay, and in that group of people, in the GLBTIQA+ group, they are at greater risk. People in that space are at greater risk of experiencing mental illness. And so being aware of that is a really important thing. And knowing that just being a success doesn't mean you're immune from mental illness. Next one along. Oprah's another good example of someone she's a bit of a champion. She's known many people in her life who have struggled with their mental health, and she's a champion at really taking mental illness seriously. So lots of people. Prince Harry is someone who's experienced his own grief and mental illness has arrived out of that. Grief in itself is not a mental illness, it's a natural event, but when it holds on and there's a duration to those feelings of darkness, then it is a mental illness. As we've said, mentally ill people, we often think that are dangerous, but they're not. For the most part. In fact, alcohol, substance use is actually probably the most dangerous thing in our current situation. 60% of people who were assaulted said that they believed their assailant, the person that assaulted them, was actually under the influence of alcohol. Less than 10% said that they believed that person was mentally unwell. That attacked them. So you can see the difference there, that substance use is a much more common reason why people are violent. So what are the numbers? How many people are we talking about here? Just in this next slide, we'll see that what mental illness is. It involves major changes. If you see a change in a friend of yours, if there's a disruption to their functioning, if they're not able to do the things that they used to do, that you used to like doing with them perhaps, and that doesn't go away as quickly as it should, it doesn't pass. If you were talking to a friend and they were not so well on a given day, you might sort of stop for a second and go, gee, they're not having a good day. You might even acknowledge that with them. Maybe, maybe not. If that went for a week, then you might start asking the question, are you okay? Is there something I can do for you? And then after a couple of weeks, then we really need to take it seriously. That's at that point that they can be diagnosed with a mental illness as little as 2 weeks. So the quicker we get people help, the earlier that we get intervene, the more likely they are to recover. These are the stats for young people between the ages of 16 to 24. These people are experiencing the symptoms of a mental illness, and you can see down the bottom right-hand corner there that more than 1 in 4 young people in that age group experience the symptoms of mental illness. The highest part of that is for females in that age group. For young females, anxiety disorder figures very prominently. More than 1 in 5 females experience that. You can see for young men, substance use, that young men have the symptoms of a substance use disorder at the rate of 15.5%. So that's 1 in 6 roughly young men who are in that space as well. So we can see there that mental illness is a very, very common thing in our culture, and being able to see that and see our friends who are struggling is a real skill. Oh, hello, we're gone. We've just lost our PowerPoint for the moment. We'll just get that back up again. Just move that along. There we are. That's great. These are some of the things. If you're wondering, well, what does depression look like? What would I see in this friend of mine? Now, obviously, sadness, when we think depression, we think sadness, and that's certainly true. That first one there is a typical one, isn't it, that we might see in someone who is depressed. That and the loss of enjoyment and interest in activities that I said before that used to be enjoyable, that would be a symptom of depression too. You need to have one of those top 2 to be diagnosed with depression, and then 5 of those 9 that are listed there all up. So things like our sleep patterns being disturbed, our diet being disturbed, so either a loss of interest in food or binge eating, just that cognitive problem that when we're trying to study and not being able to concentrate, those sorts of things, fatigue, feeling worthless, feeling guilty when there's nothing we've really done to deserve. Anxiety is normal in the current circumstance. It's normal to feel that. Doesn't mean you have an anxiety disorder if you're really feeling anxious, even to the extent of having a panic attack. That doesn't mean you've actually got a mental illness. An anxiety disorder is where that's very severe and where it lasts longer and it is getting in the way of you actually functioning. You can't do anything. That's really important that we talk about, and we will. I'll just mention now a couple of things that you can make sure you do. Whatever you can, make sure your routines are maintained. Do what you can do to do that. Obviously, our situation now has changed a lot, and going to school and those sorts of things, those routines are kind of falling away. So at the moment, finding yourself a new routine, getting into a habit of getting out, of getting some exercise, of doing something that actually raises your heart rate, of doing things that you enjoy, and finding things that are new joys, perhaps trying new things. This is a good time for being creative, or being, picking up the guitar, or getting some singing lessons, online singing lessons or something. Find a new joy, a new passion. Reading books and things like that can be really good ways of getting through this and just changing our anxiety levels, and simply breathing. Watching our breathing and deliberately breathing and sitting in the moment. If we're worried about the future or worried about something that's happened in the past, just focusing on the here and now and thinking, what's 5 things I can see? What are 4 things I can smell? What are 3 things I can touch? they're good habits for people who might be experiencing anxiety at the moment. So I'm going to move along a little bit, and one of the things I want to encourage you to do is be mythbusters, not to make assumptions around people who have mental illness. This is something you may want to see at some stage and look up, this idea of that a lot of the illnesses that people talk about, we don't actually really fully understand. That idea down the bottom there, that substance use, addiction isn't necessarily a choice someone makes. It can be a place in which they're stuck and they actually need medical help to get out of. So those sorts of ideas are unusual for people, and perhaps we need to be advocates for people who are mentally unwell. Just one of the things we do know is that there are a lot of barriers to help seeking, and I think people are too embarrassed sometimes or too shy to talk about it. They feel that there's a great deal of stigma, that they would be labelled if they were to admit that they are struggling with their mental health. That's a common one. Getting less common, I'm glad to say, that as we go along, people are more, and particularly younger people today, are much more willing to accept the idea of mental illness. When I was growing up, you were either crazy or you weren't. That was really as simple as it was. Now we know there are many, many different variations on that. And even for someone who is well mentally, they have good days and bad days. We have good mental health days and bad mental health days, just as we do with physical illness. We may be afraid that the person may think badly of us, or some people just don't know why they don't get help. My encouragement to us is sit with them, talk to them about why they don't want to get help, if that's where they are, and talk to them about what it actually might look like to get help. There are many free opportunities to get help via Lifeline and Kids Helpline. Kids Helpline sounds like it's for young kids, but it's actually up to people of age 25. eHeadspace is another, and I'll leave you at the end with some of these numbers just to give you some ideas about that. But that 43% of people saying, I don't know, is a really interesting one, because we don't know. Some of the feelings we might have are new to us, perhaps, and we don't know what's happening. Getting some help, having a conversation with someone who knows, a mental health professional in particular, can help us a great deal. Knowing that for young people, the burden of disease, mental health is the leading cause of illness for young people. Concerned about a friend of yours. Just in terms of what I just mentioned before, in terms of suicide, and let's talk just briefly about suicide. And again, I say, if it's your lived experience, look after yourself. Here's the data that 36% of deaths of people in 15 to 24-year-olds, we're going back to 2017 now, were by suicide. So more than a third, and it's the highest leading cause of death amongst young people. So that's a real concern. What's encouraging about this chart is that 15% for motor vehicle injuries used to be much higher. And we did things about it. We did something about it. We actually made people aware of the damage people were doing, particularly if they were drinking and driving or using substances and driving. We made some steps. We did RBT. We made steps to make sure our roads were safer. I believe that's coming with mental health as well, and that suicide figure will come down, that we will see a real drop in it as we take mental health seriously and people get help with their problems. So if you are concerned about a friend, that is something. Looking after their mental health will be a key for them in averting that possibility, that horrible possibility in their lives and in yours. One of the things that, and we'll just go back, that's the one. One of the things that I'm offering at Rosny College, and when we're back up and running as a school, this will be available to you, is a course that I'm looking to encourage young people to get involved in. And that idea of having a plan, because if you're talking to a friend who's really struggling, and maybe even they're thinking that life is not worth living, and they're thinking in terms of suicide, having a plan when they start talking to you about that is key. And one of the first things we do is we ask them, we talk openly, are you thinking about suicide? That actually might seem like an edgy thing to do and a dangerous thing to do. In fact, talking about it is one of the safest things we can do. Having it out in front of us and naming that elephant in the room. Are you thinking about suicide is one of the safest questions you can ever ask of someone who is struggling in their mental health. Really take seriously what they're experiencing. Then working with them and saying, well, we need to keep you safe. I'm not going to leave you alone in this space. We're going to find you some help. It's not a good secret to keep. It's certainly if someone says that to you, you don't keep it secret, even if they want you to. You say to them, we're going to get you help. How would you like to do that? What are we going to do? Are we going to ring Lifeline together or Kids Helpline? Or are we going to tell your GP, your doctor? Or what are we going to do to get you some help that you need? Because it's not good that you're feeling that way. We really need to get you help. So having a plan is really important. And that's why Rosny College has been looking into running the Teen Mental Health First Aid course. It's a three-session course that's run over three 80-minute sessions. And essentially what it is learning how to have those conversations, practicing those conversations to be able to help a friend, not unlike a Lifeliner would do. And interestingly enough, Lady Gaga's picked that up. She's the founder of a group called Born This Way Foundation. I'll just put her picture up. There she is. She actually runs this foundation that is sending people out using that course out of Australia. It's an Australian course. She's got a hold of it, and in America she's now rolling that out in schools throughout America. So that's something to keep in mind and put in your back pocket for when we're back at school, when things return, hopefully to normal or our new version of normal, whatever that will look like. Being able to be involved in that teen course that I'll be running with you. And that qualifies you. You actually become an accredited mental health first aider, not unlike you would a senior first aid course in the physical sense. And just to finish up with, I want you to look after yourselves. Over this time of isolation, of that physical distancing, let's remain socially connected. Use whatever you can, these forums that are available online to make sure we keep connecting with each other. So, and don't let your battery, as it says there, don't let your battery go down. It's a priority, it's not a luxury. So make sure you look after yourself so you can look after the people around you as well. And if you do have a conversation with a friend that's pretty heavy and awkward, do something to look after yourself. Do things that you enjoy afterwards. That's what I always recommend. Here's a little poster I really like, and it's just 50 ways to take a break when you're struggling. Maybe you're at home and you're really feeling cooped up and not enjoying the people around you. Others. Become aware, self-aware of those things that help you. Thanks for listening. There's a few opportunities here that I've just left on the screen here, just Kids Helpline that I've mentioned, Lifeline also, or the chat at Headspace. That's a really good opportunity. You can just go online and have a text conversation with someone as well. And there's various forums and other things that you can get to online. Become familiar with it. What's available online in terms of mental health. Go to those organisations that you can trust, names that you know, and look into it. Thanks for listening. I'm available. You can see my web address there. You can contact me through that if you'd like to know more about some of the things I've talked about today. Thanks for listening, and thank you, Rosny, and thank you, Gav, particularly, for allowing me to talk today.